Today, let's look at some old comic book history. So, back in 1973, I was in Ed's comic shop in Philly, and my friend Ernie pointed out this cover with all these superheroes on it. And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "It's Jim Steranko's History of the Comics, Part 1. I said, "Oh, really?" And I vaguely remembered an ad that he used to run in Marvel Comics. So I opened it up, and there was the first page. So I kept going through the pages, and it had comic strip history, some of which I knew from other books. Then it had history of the pulps, which were these really cheap magazines printed on newsprint paper, really cheap stuff. So-called pulp because that's what paper is made from, is tree pulp. And I had never seen any of these covers before. So this was a revelation. And then it gets to the chapter on Superman. And I said, well, I kind of know stuff about Superman and the rest of the heroes in here, so maybe I'll skip to the next book. And this is the cover for Steranko's History of the Comics Part 2. And this one had a lot of information in it that I had no idea. I had no idea what lay before me. So I bought this. I think it cost me $3. And it had the history of Captain Marvel. And I knew who that was, but I did not know the backstory. And this is why I fell in love with this book. Because it had covers that I had never seen. And I was just fascinated by this. And at the time he was researching and writing this, most of these guys are still alive that did all this artwork. So he could track them down and interview them and get statements from them. So this is a drawing by Mac Raboy of Captain Marvel Jr. and an American Eagle. It's a self-portrait he did of himself drawing a comic. There's a rough layout he did for a comic cover. One of the first times I'd seen penciling of a comic. And then here was a page of how to draw Captain Marvel Jr. Like I said, I was just fascinated by all this information. And then these comics heroes were Fawcett Publications' other guys. Great drawing by Ken Bald, who was a comic strip artist after he got out of comic books. And then this page, Reed Crandall, one of the two or four masters of comics back in the 40s. It's a wonderful drawing. This is how he drew in 1972. And you can see a difference between the two pages there. This is probably 1941, and this is 1972. All of us change our art styles as we get older. And it goes on. I'd never heard of these comic companies that he's talking about here. That's Airboy. I never heard of this hero at all. And there's a bunch of covers of Airboy comics. Drawing of Skywolf. Mort Lev did that drawing. He's fighting this character called the Heap, which predates Swamp Thing and Man Thing by 30-some years. It just seemed like the comic book stands must have been fascinating to look at. Then we get into Plastic Man by Jack Cole. Great drawing. I had heard of Plastic Man, but I had never seen the original comics from back in those days. He was in 2 comics, Police Comics and his own title. Here's a page of How to Draw Cartooning by Jack Cole. Looks like he wrote it and drew it in 1937. Then we get into other Quality Comics. Plastic Man was published by Quality Comics. Here's a Reed Crandall Uncle Sam from back in 1942. Such a great drawing. Just look at the solidity of that. Here's another Reed Crandall drawing of Doll Man from the cover and his girlfriend, Doll Girl. These other heroes, I had never heard of these people before. So there's all these pages devoted to Quality Comics. A great drawing by Lou Fine of the Red Bee. I'd never heard of that character. And if you look closely at the line work and the pose and the fluidity of it, just incredible. Another great cover by Lou Fine for Hit Comics of Hercules fighting this giant. Never knew about any of these guys. Then the last chapter is about Will Eisner's character, the Spirit. I had seen the Spirit in one of the other comic history books, but the tale that they reprinted, I didn't quite get it, and it was in color. So here he's showing you 4 splash pages for the Spirit. The Spirit ran in newspapers in the Sunday comic section as a supplement in a comic book form. So when you would get your Sunday newspaper and there was a color section for the comics, I think inside that or in front of that would have been the Spirit section, which had an 8-page story of the Spirit, and then more pages of Lady Luck and another character. And this section, I guess it was 16 pages, because that's what you get when you fold giant paper down. It comes out to 16 pages. And then he reprints a great Spirit story. I think this is from about 47. And I had never seen artwork like this, let alone figured that it came from the 40s. So this was an incredible find for me in 1973. Then he ends with this great drawing by Mort Lev, and this is Uncle Sam has just defeated Mussolini and Hitler, and he's going to beat up Tojo. This is when the U.S. was at war with Italy and Germany and Japan in World War II. And the last 2 pages are a tiny little thing right up about Jim Steranko and panels from his comics that he did at Marvel in 1966 to 1969. Drawing by Jack Binder of Mary Marvel, one of the Marvel family, and the back cover. So I guess after that I bought part 1. And Steranko History of Comics. And over here he writes, dedicated to Jack Kirby, without whom there may not have been any comics to write a history about. So let's go to where I left off with The Coming of Superman. This is a drawing by Joe Shuster. I don't think they ever finished it, but it's a pencil drawing of Superman lifting a guy up. And it gives you the backstory about how this all came about. Superman started as a comic strip, and then when they sold it as a comic book, they took this art, cut it up into comic book pages. And here are rough drawings, breakdowns, and rough layouts of Joe Shuster's, so you can see his style. All these great covers I had never seen. And then it goes into Batman and how Batman was created by Bob Kane. So DC Comics has Superman, and then they have Batman. This is a Jerry Robinson drawing of the Joker and Batman and Robin from 1942. And then it gets into Captain America. Jack Kirby and Joe Simon create Captain America. This is a Jack Kirby drawing done probably in 1970 for Jim Steranko. Just for this book, I'm pretty sure. And then it shows the early Captain America covers. And then Kirby did this drawing just to give to Steranko in 1967 of Captain America coming right to camera. Then we get into the other heroes at Timely Comics, which is what Marvel Comics was called back in the late 30s, early 40s. And we see the creation of the Human Torch, a Bill Everett drawing of the Torch fighting Submariner, and he probably did this in 1969 or 70 and gave it to Jim Steranko for this book. So here's a history of the old Marvel Comics before they were the modern Marvel Comics of the 60s. All these covers. Now we get to the DC Comics, the Justice Society of America, which predates the Justice League of America. A great drawing by Joe Kubert of a bunch of the heroes of the JSA, the Atom, Sandman, Dr. Fate, Spectre, Starman, Johnny Thunder, Dr. Midnight, and holding them, Hawkman. So we see a whole bunch of covers here of comics. Again, I'd never seen any of these comic covers. And I was just fascinated by this great page by Jerry Robinson and Morton Meskin. If you can look up those two guys, you see a lot of great artwork there. More covers. Then we get to Kid Gangs. Here's a Jack Kirby, Joe Simon drawing of the Boy Commandos from World War II, their comic characters. They also did this character, the Guardian, with the Newsboy Legion, another Kid Gang. This is their letterhead, characters that they created on their letterhead. So, it's the end page again of Steranko stuff. Different images, but these are all comic images that he drew. And he ends with this drawing by Wayne Boring of Superman saying, "Well, it does tickle." And the back cover. So what I wanted to show you is what comics used to look like. So this is a reproduction of Action Number 1 by Jerry Siegel, the writer, and Joe Shuster, the artist. And if you were a kid in 1938, it's dated June, but it probably was on the newsstand in April, you would have seen this image, and nothing like that had ever been seen on a comic book before. And comics had been out a few years before this, but this is the first superhero comic. And this cover by Joe Shuster became such an image in comics history. And this is what his comic pages look like back in those days. So this is the origin of Superman, where he came from. But look at the drawings. Look at how they're mostly just outlines and not a lot of detail. He doesn't have on red boots. They said that they patterned his costume after a circus strongman. And this is what the circus strongman would wear back in the old days in the circus. This is a guy that would impress you with feats of strength and lifting up 500-pound barbells. But this art, it was, for its time, there's the cover image, it looks so different than what comics became. Even a couple years after this, comics were a little bit better drawn than Joe Shuster. So then the rest of the book are other heroes, some of them written and drawn by Siegel and Schuster. The Tower of the Magician. He lasted long into the 60s, 70s, 90s, 2000s. Text pages. Some funny stuff here. Sticky Mitt Stimson. Adventures of Marco Polo. You had to fill these books up with something. But look at how simple the drawings are. It's not overly complicated by tons of line work. Bernard Bailey was another great comics master back in those days. So this is a reproduction of the actual comic, Action #1. Then they put out this one, which is a reproduction of Superman #1, which came out the next year, 39. And 64 pages for a dime. So we see a reprint of the origin of Superman. And same story. Then they added another Superman story. This might have been from Action #2 originally. But look at how simple the artwork is. It's not overly complicated. This is a direct reproduction of that comic. Just all Superman stories in here. Ross Andrew drawing of the Twin Towers. So this came out in 74. Now they're figuring out, hey, we can make some money off of these reprints. So here's another Superman story. Very simplistic artwork. Gets the point across. Now we get a different artist, Jack Burnley, drawing a Superman story here. And his art is different than Joe Shuster's art. You can tell this guy has a bit more training. Then there's 2 pages, How to Draw Superman by Curt Swan, who became the best known Superman artist of the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s. His Superman was the one. That's the one that represented the company. And he shows you how he starts with a stick figure, adds volumes to it, starts to refine it with actual mass of muscles, and then final details. This is a clinic on how to draw Superman. And we get another story drawn by Wayne Boring, who went from the 40s into the 70s. There's some Neil Adams stuff in here. Concept for Superman's future. Okay. Kurt Schaffenberger, another great super artist. Usually he would draw the Lois Lane comics. And then a Ross Andrew, Mike Esposito story. Totally different layouts here. Total different approach to drawing. So that was a Superman thing. Now here's Batman. This is the first appearance of Batman, Detectives 27, 1939. Look at this art by Bob Kane. Notice how simple it is. Gets the point across. It's not very complicated, not loaded down with lots of line work. very short story there. And then we go into other characters to fill up the book. And I think that short story of Batman was the only Batman story in here. Slam Brady is by Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. That was a character I think that they created. So then they put out Batman #1. I think this is 1940 now. A retelling of the origin by Bob Kane in 2 pages. And then the Joker. This might be his first appearance. And look how simplistic this art is. So your drawings do not have to be so slick and finished, as long as you get the storyline across. So these giant mutant guys are walking around Gotham wrecking the town. I think they were escapees from a mental institution, and Batman says, well, the only way I can get these guys is with the Batplane. And the Batplane has a machine gun on it. So he shoots up this truck. The guys fall out. One guy gets up. He throws down a noose, lifts him up and hangs the guy. And he cuts him loose and falls down. Another guy is climbing up a building and he shoots him down just like King Kong. So here's Bob Kane. Meet the artist. And here's how he gets Robin as his assistant. First appearance of Catwoman. Or was it? Yeah, I think it is. So that's the Batman reprint. And here is Captain Marvel. His first appearance in Whiz Comics. And we see Captain Marvel on the cover throwing a car into a brick wall. Which is a lot like that first issue of Action Comics of Superman throwing a car. Well, this comic, published by Fawcett, this is drawn by C.C. Beck, who was the main Captain Marvel artist back in the day. Notice how simple the art is and how it puts the point across of Billy Batson walking down into the subway, meeting up with the old man whose name is Shazam, and every time the name is spoken down there, there's a big cloud and lightning comes down. And the point of Captain Marvel is that when Billy Batson says the word Shazam, he turns into Captain Marvel. This is a history of what Shazam stands for. Wisdom of Solomon, strength of Hercules, stamina of Atlas, power of Zeus, courage of Achilles, and the speed of Mercury. All the Greek gods. So this is a really great first issue. Billy Batson is a newspaper boy. He has a newsstand on the corner, and he was one of those kids that would say, extra, extra, read all about it. So when there's danger, he calls Shazam, turns into Captain Marvel, down to the rescue. This art is so good for its time to get this story across, and kids loved this back in those days. And Fawcett sold a ton of comics of Captain Marvel, at some points outselling Superman. And then the rest of the book is full of other heroes. Ibis the Invincible was a magic dude who could rescue people with his magic. Remember, there was one at DC called Zatara. The Golden Arrow was a guy that could shoot arrows to rescue people. In those days, guys would sit around and say, well, what's the next power we need for our next superhero? Here's Spy Smasher, who was smashing spies, as the name implies. And his costume is an aviator's helmet and a red cape. Big, tall boots. Hardly even see him in this adventure. Scoop Smith was a reporter, getting the goods on the bad guys and putting them into the newspaper. Lance O'Casey was the sailor guy, a swashbuckling sailor of fortune. And here he is in the jungles. There's a bald-headed dude, looks like Lex Luthor. And then there's Dan Dare, Seals of Doom. So, like I said, comics were a lot simpler back in those days. Notice the color is not Photoshop, it's flat colors. Very simplistic layouts, very simplistic colors. But nobody had seen anything like this really before, except in the Sunday comics section. So that's my tale of old comics, and I'm sticking to it. And how I got so interested in comics history, thanks to Jim Steranko. Anyway, if you're doing a comic, keep it simple, keep it fresh, keep it exciting, and draw what you like, and just make a great story that people like. Don't worry about the artwork being Michelangelo. Until then, keep drawing, keep creating, and we'll see you next time.